Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We already have our speaker here. His name is Dr. Bryan G. Hopkins, and he is a certified professional soil scientist specializing in turfgrass science and management. He is a professor. He's teaching and conducting research at BYU in Provo, Utah. He consulted with wide variety of sports team, golf course, and other organizations, and is internationally renowned as evidenced by honor of being among less than 1% of scientists selected as a fellow in Soil Science Society of America and American Society of Agronomy. And with that, it's all over to you, Dr. Bryan Hopkins.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here today. I've been answering a lot of questions about this topic, and so I'm looking forward to being able to share some of the information that we've collected over the last few years on this topic. I'll share my slides.
Okay,
I
it's working.
Okay, great. Um, this is the topic I was asked to speak on. I'm going to I'm going to give a little background before I get started. And, kind of the obvious thing that anybody who's in Utah knows that we've just had a mega drought for a long time. This particular drought that I'm showing here was in 2021, kind of at the end of the summer, and it was brutal. Um, Today, I pulled this down just today. This is where we are, and this is in May. And it's not good when we got these dark colors showing that we have such a bad drought already. It is going to be much worse in terms of this drought by the time we get through the summer. So it's really one of the driving factors for the reason why we're here today. I get I hear this often is like, well, the answer is just stop irrigating, get rid of all the grass, put in rock lawns and those kinds of things. I just heartily disagree. There are a lot of benefits of grass and landscape plants. They're good things. Matter of fact, there's about 3 dozen scientifically proven reasons why we want to have plants in our landscape. Um, Sorry, there we go. Turning our cities into concrete jungles is not something that I think is what I want to be part of. It's not the answer for water conservation, even though it might seem to be that way. Putting Doing that creates massive heat islands, and they can actually, in large cities, including Salt Lake, it can actually create its own weather and it actually feed back into making droughts worse. So that's just not what I want to be part of. And it's no fun to live in those environments. I've lived in big cities that what I would call a concrete jungle. I did not enjoy it. I like plants. They have spiritual, mental, physical health benefits to us as people. It has benefits to the earth, has impacts on climate change, carbon sequestration. Grass is one of the best things of pulling carbon from the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. And so there's a lot of reasons. We don't have time to go through them all, but I would suggest that having plants and landscape is one of our goals. In order to do this, rather than just shutting off the irrigation, it's just better to be smarter with our irrigation. And of course, my friends here at Utah State, Dr. Cope and others that work with the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping have done a great job putting together a lot of things. I point you to that. That resource is phenomenal. I've kind of put together my own thing. I teach classes at BYU, and I've got my little PDF that Dr. Neil Hansen and I put together on drought proofing the block, 12 essential water saving hacks. If you'd like to download that, you can just do an internet search and type in BYU EAL and click on resources, or you can just use this QR code. But just briefly, um, these 12 essential water saving hacks include irrigating less often. It's important to not irrigate every day. And a lot of times, what I see frequently is that somebody established the lawn, and they set the irrigation system to run every day, and in many cases multiple times a day, 2 or 3 times a day, short little bursts. That's maybe good for when you're trying to get seeds to germinate and get established, but then nobody made an adjustment, and it's still doing that after the grass is established. That's even worse with bigger plants, ornamentals in her. So we just don't want to do that. We need to be watering as infrequently as we can get away with. Is going to be one of the things to save water. I'm kind of listing these 12 things also in the order of kind of easiest and cheapest to do. The next thing would be to irrigate deeply. Watering deeply fosters deeper roots. Irrigating at the right time of day. It's not good to water in the evening. It creates disease, particularly for turf grass. We don't want to do that. We want to reduce the amount of leaf wetness. So it's better to water in the morning. I don't want to water in the middle of the day because I've got more evapotranspiration. I'm more likely to have wind, and so I'm just less efficient. So if I can, if my system is allows me to get all my watering done in the mornings, that's typically when I want to do that. It's good to stress the plants, just like people. Having a little bit of stress in our lives actually makes us stronger. Plants are no different. I like to let my grass especially get water stress. I don't turn on my irrigation. I haven't turned. I'm in Provo. I haven't turned on my irrigation at my house other than to just I fired it up, made sure it's working, and then I just shut it off. And I probably won't turn it on till maybe the end of May or even June some years. Um, and I just wait. I watch. And then when that grass is stressed, and I can tell because it kind of gets a grayish hue to it, when I step on it, it doesn't bounce back like you can see those footprints in that grass right there. That's when it's ready. And then I'll go ahead and turn on my water, kind of get it watered up a little bit, and then I'll repeat that process. So I'll do that twice in the spring to get my grass and my other plants wanting to physiologically root deeper. I also want to mow for root depth. Short mowing is not good. And so in some cases, we have to mow short, golf greens, sports fields. But other than that, we ought to be mowing a little taller. We don't want to go too tall because then I get kind of thin grass. So most grass, at least 2 inches for most of the grasses that we're growing. 2.5, maybe 3 is kind of the range that we typically want to be. And there's differences with different species, but the principle is the taller I mow, typically the deeper my roots. I also need to fertilize correctly, and most of us don't. The vast majority of us don't do this right. Um, we need to base it on a soil test. We need to put our nitrogen down, and I'm going to show you some management here later on in terms of fertilizing. But it's important to do that. It will help build healthier plants, and especially in the fall. A lot of times, if I'm growing cool season grasses, the fall application of fertilizer is the most important. I don't want to put my grass to bed being nutrient starved. The late fall is when it's putting down deep roots. And so it's really important, especially to have nitrogen adequate at that time. I want to aerate my soil. And the best thing I can do is do these other things on the left side of the screen. If I'm irrigating right, I'm going to have more oxygen in the root zone. I might need to also actually do aeration if I have grass that is, or typically I'm talking about grass here at this point. Um, if I do core aeration, that kind of opens it up, it gets some oxygen there, and I'm going to foster deeper rooting. If I don't have aeration, it forces the roots and the earthworms and the tree roots. They just want to be at the surface because there's no oxygen. They're no different than us. They need oxygen. And if I don't have oxygen, then they're just going to be forced to live at the surface. And that's not what we want. We want deep roots with oxygen. Maintain the system, make sure it's running right. I don't have leaks and those kinds of things. I want to install a smart controller. It's one of the best things we do, and it's really not too expensive. A lot of municipalities will have rebates for these. It's one of the best things that we can do. I get really frustrated. I'm driving to work, it's raining, and people's yards are being irrigated with their automatic sprinkler system. And frankly, a smart controller, it can often cut about half of our water use. If we just do that alone, it would cut back. how much water we use as a society by massive amounts. So I'm a big fan of smart controllers. I think it is good to reduce the grass. I'm the grass guy at BYU, and here I am telling people that we probably ought to reduce the grass. There's some great programs out there that foster this, that help us to not eliminate the grass. I don't think that's good in most cases. There's actually studies by real estate folks that scientists who study real estate that say the property values actually drop for people who get rid of all their grass. That's not true in every locale, but in most it is. And so having a little bit of grass that's functional, a place for the kids to play, a little bit of aesthetics is good, but maybe reduce from having just wall-to-wall grass. Installing water-wise plants. There's a picture right there of my uh, parking strip that used to be grass, and I put in some water-wise plants, and I don't have to water it hardly at all. I'm only using 5% of the water that I used to use for grass, and it's beautiful. I have actually had people stop by and ask me who was the architect who put in my parking strip. So that's a great thing. And then lastly, which is the topic for today, is change the grass. But I would just say I think those previous 11 steps are really important because changing the grass isn't going to save any water if I just keep irrigating the way that I always did. But it is an option to change out what type of grass that we use. It's important to understand this idea because what we're going to talk about today is cool and warm season grasses. Now, historically, this is the map that's still out there if you search this on the internet, and you can see that Utah is solidly in a cool season zone. St. George is kind of in the transition zone, but most of us are in a cool season climate. So the most common cool season grasses are Kentucky bluegrass, which is a great grass. It's by far the most commonly used sports turf, for example, in northern climates, including Lavelle Edwards Stadium. It does a great job of repairing itself. It takes traffic. It's just really good. It's actually pretty good at drought. If you're in a drought, it'll actually rebound um, pretty amazing, even after weeks without water sometimes. So it's got some good points. It's got some negatives that we'll talk about here in a second. Tall fescue, increasingly popular, a little more water tolerant, or excuse me, a little less water use than bluegrass. Perennial ryegrass is nice. It's nice green color. It's got some uses that we're going to talk about a little bit later with regard to the hybrid Bermuda grass. Fine fescues in the shade, I don't really love them. They tend to get wispy and they don't really stand up straight, but that's fairly commonly found in sun and shade mixes. And then bent grass, mostly in golf, and frankly, I don't really love it as a lawn grass outside of golf greens and tee boxes. But the fact is, though, it's harder and harder to grow these cool season grasses because the climate is warming. I have data over the last decades here at BYU, and I can show you that the climate is getting warmer. It is definitely warmer than it used to be. And so it's increasingly difficult to try to grow bluegrass. I have at BYU, I teach the grasses class, and I like to have hands-on. And so I put in these demo plots for my students in the fall so that they can see grass live. And I've got 30 different plots of the most commonly grown grasses, and not just those that are cool season, but the warm season ones as well. So I've got in blue here, I've got the cool season grasses that I grow. And then I've also got these in yellow, these warm season grasses. Now, these warm season grasses typically die in the winter. That's common. And that's when I first did this back in 2007. I was fully expecting all of them to die out, except for maybe a couple. The exceptions were buffalo grass will die somewhat, but some of it'll survive. I haven't had great luck with it, frankly. Some years it'll come through no problem. Other years I'll get a lot of winter kill. I've got a neighbor who's got, I don't know what kind of cultivar he's got, but it looks actually pretty nice and seems to get through the winters okay. So, that is an option for a warm season grass. Another one that I haven't had a lot of luck with is zoysia grass. Utah State grows it successfully up in Logan. I just struggle with it. It just dies out on me every year. I think it's because we're not as cold as you are in Logan, and I think when zoysia goes dormant in Logan, it just stays dormant. And I don't know if it's just I have less snow cover or what, but I really struggle with zoysia here in Provo. The other two, though, is common Bermuda grass and hybrid Bermuda grass. Now, I've had these plots since 2007. I've never had any winter kill in these plots. And after the first year, I was kind of like, wow, that was fluky, maybe. And then after the second year, I'm like, oh, wow, this is really doing. And 4 or 5 years later, I'm thinking, my goodness, this is really good in terms of winter survival for a warm season grass. And that's what began this whole project because I knew that Bermuda grass was pretty low water use. So we did some research, and then a few years ago, we started our legalized grass campaign, and we kind of say that tongue in cheek, but it worked. We were able to get the petition the state in cooperation with Utah State, and also others like Eric Marble with Chanshire Farms and some others. But we petitioned them, and after showing them some data, they were satisfied, and they took the hybrid Bermuda grass and specifically the triploid specific hybrid Bermuda grass, they took it off of the noxious weed list, which then opened it up for sales in Utah. That's fairly new. It's only been a couple of years now to where it's legal to grow this grass in Utah. So some of the things that we showed the state was that number one, the seeds of a hybrid are not viable. It'll form a few seed heads, but those seeds won't grow. And so that makes it less aggressive. That's the reason why Bermuda grass in general was on the noxious weed list, is because it's so aggressive. But hybrid is a different animal. It doesn't have viable seeds. It's kind of like a mule, right? You take a donkey and a horse and you breed them together and you get the mule, and the mule is sterile. Well, these guys are sterile. The other thing is they're just not very aggressive otherwise either. And I get people kind of arguing with me about that, but our data shows pretty conclusively that it's not. Now, this picture over on the right, what is this? This is actually my backyard. Much to my wife's chagrin, about three years ago, I cut out these little squares out there with a sod cutter, and I dropped in hybrid Bermuda grass sod because I wanted to see how long it would take for it to take over the bluegrass. And here we are 3 years later. This is after 3 years. And you can see that this was before the Bermuda came out of dormancy. So the brown little squares is dormant hybrid Bermuda grass early spring, and then it's got bluegrass in between. And I just haven't seen a lot of spread of either one of them. If you have healthy grass, they just don't really want to grow. Now they will spread, both of them, but they're just not as aggressive as common Bermuda grass, which is that's the culprit that's still on the noxious weed list because it is so aggressive. So it's important to understand that. That's one of the most common questions that I'm getting. And in fact, I get people making comments. They're like, "Oh, this is terrible. Bad idea. We shouldn't have made this legal." Well, it's because they don't understand. They're thinking common Bermuda grass. A lot of folks have had experience with that in their lives, and it will get into your flower beds and it will, grow all over the place. And the other thing is, it's just not a good turf grass. It's really coarse. It's not a good looking grass. You can see here several pictures of the two in comparison to each other. Here's another one. This was taken this morning. It's not completely out of dormancy yet, so it doesn't look great as it does. It'll here in about a month. But over there on the left is a more of this hybrid Bermuda, which is turf type, compared to that kind of nasty looking common on the right. Sorry, hybrid on the left, common on the right. So Kentucky bluegrass, again, very commonly used, but it is a water hog. Now, I said it's drought tolerant. That's true. But in order to keep it happy, it has to have a lot of water. So if you don't want it to slide into drought dormancy, you got to put on a lot of water. Hybrid Bermuda, again, and by the way, hybrid Bermuda grass is the most commonly grown grass in the southern United States. This is not a new thing. It's a great turf grass. It's the most commonly grown sports turf. For example, Las Vegas Raiders, the Arizona Cardinals, they have hybrid Bermuda grass on their sports fields. It's a great grass, and it's known to be drought tolerant, which is the reason we're here today. So I'm going to show you a little data. I've got tons of studies, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, just a few things. We did a study where we looked at comparing Kentucky bluegrass, also hybrid Bermuda grass's parents, which are common Bermuda grass and African Bermuda grass. You combine those two and you get hybrid Bermuda grass. So, and then we looked at 6 different Bermuda grass cultivars, including each one of these. And we've done this study. It's actually been in place for several years. We've watched it in terms of cold tolerance and also drought. Here's a little overhead picture of our little study. Um, we took weekly measurements, including NDVI. You're going to hear me talk about that a little bit here and there. Essentially, that's a measure of plant health. We use this little wand to measure how healthy that grass is. We also did visual quality ratings. We did canopy cover, and then we measured water. So just kind of a summary, one slide here. This is after not irrigating for 6 weeks in the summer, and we didn't have any rain. This is the hottest part of the summer. The visual quality of these grasses, the hybrid Bermuda grass, was the best. It did better than its parents. Um, and it also did better than Kentucky bluegrass over there on the left. The Kentucky bluegrass was barely hanging on after 6 weeks. And we've repeated this several times, have gotten similar results each time. So what we learned from that trial was that the cultivars themselves, they were pretty similar. Tahoma 31 was really the best, but we also had really, Iron Cutter, for example, was also nice. Um, but Kentucky bluegrass didn't do well compared, as well as the African and the common. And again, the African and the common, they are seeded versions, and they are not legal in Utah. And if somebody tries to tell you different and sell you seed, uh, that is not what's approved in Utah. You can only establish this stuff vegetatively. I'm not really have time to talk about that today. I have a little fact sheet that can kind of explain it. I'll show you that here later. We also did another study that was really groundbreaking. We had 3 irrigation levels, severe drought, where we would shut the water off and we would wait until the hybrid Bermuda grass was visibly stressed. We did mild drought stress by doing the same thing with the bluegrass. And then we had optimal irrigation. And we had 3 grass types. We had 2 types of hybrid Bermuda grass, latitude 36 and Tahoma 31. And then we had Kentucky bluegrass. So we did this study. And again, I could show you tons of data, and I'm not going to do that. But this is that NDVI reading. Again, kind of plant health. What we're looking at here on the left is this is relative to the optimum. So in other words, if it's around zero line, that means it performed as well as fully irrigated grass. And that's kind of where we want it to be, is in that box right there. Well, mildly stressed Kentucky bluegrass, it did okay. It dropped below that line, a couple of dips. This is 2 different dry downs during the summer. And you can see that it didn't do great, but it did all right as long as we turned the water on before it got too dry. But of course, the hybrid Bermuda grass, it didn't even drop below the line at all. It just looked great under mild drought stress. Kentucky bluegrass under severe drought stress just tanked, did terrible. But hybrid Bermuda grass, other than that one little line kind of drops down just a little bit, it did great. This is after 6 weeks of no irrigation in the middle of the summer. So that's incredible data. This is the same stuff, visual quality. I'm not going to sit and go through it in detail. We don't have time, but you kind of see the same thing visually. And then this is the canopy cover, also very similar data. The bottom line is we've got 3 different measurements there showing us that hybrid Bermuda grass is a pretty strong um, uh, performer with several weeks of no irrigation and no rainfall. That was one year. This is the other year, and just to kind of just show you that we got this similar data. I wanted to just kind of highlight this as well. In terms of water use, if you look at those bars over there on the right, that's severe drought stress. And you can see that even after 6 weeks, that hybrid Bermuda grass, there was still more water in the soil with hybrid Bermuda grass than there was Kentucky bluegrass, which is the green bar on the furthest right. So 6 weeks, no irrigation, big differences in how much water is still in the soil. Here's an aerial image of this, just to kind of give you a little bit of a visual here. That plot right there is Kentucky bluegrass, 6 weeks, no irrigation. And then these are the replicates. Didn't do well. In one case, it actually died out. We did this 4 different times. The other 3 times it survived, but it just didn't look great. This is another visual just kind of showing you the different, um, each of the hybrids and cultivars and the different drought stresses. So you can see that in general, the hybrid Bermuda grass did really well. Here's another picture just to give you a little bit of a bird's eye view of it. All right. So the conclusion of that was that we uh, by several measures, we went as many as 9 weeks, 5 to 9 weeks before Bermuda grass began showing stress. 9 weeks was our longest stretch with no irrigation. Now, to be fair, though, that 9 week, it had about a week of rain and cool temperatures that helped us stretch that. So it's important that you don't walk out here and say, Brian Hopkins promises that I can not water for 6 weeks. The answer to that is it depends. I mean, this was well-established Bermuda grass that had deep roots, and it was Provo conditions, and so everybody's going to be a little bit different. But what I can say is that we went several weeks at 4 different times without irrigation, and it did great. Um, and again, this is in a cool season climate where it's really not supposed to be doing well. I mentioned the deep roots. That's one of the reasons. There's several reasons why. We're not going to go into the science, but one of the reasons is it will put down really deep roots. We've measured roots routinely 3 feet and deeper, and bluegrass doesn't do that. These cool season grasses, they just don't do that. If I get 8 inches root depth, I'm pleased. And by July, August, end of August, it's not uncommon to only have 3, 4 inches of root depth, especially if I'm mismanaging it, like we do in sometimes with sports fields and we mow them short. So we've got this, we've got some cultivars, not all of them, by the way, please. That's a really important message. I've had somebody went down and got some sod from southern Utah and brought it up here and planted it in Salt Lake, and it all died out in the winter. So not all of these, all of the available cultivars, or sorry, we should say cultivars, say hybrids. They're not all cold tolerant, but the ones I've listed are, and they're drought tolerant. And we're not the only ones that have had success with the cold tolerance. Philadelphia Eagles, Philly's a cold place. It's got cold winters, and they've had Bermuda grass for a long time. My good friend Tony Leonard is he's the manager there, and he's successfully learned how to grow Bermuda grass on a professional football field, and so we've got that data point. Northwestern University installed it in Chicago. Unfortunately, it only lasted a year before they replaced it with artificial grass, which is the deadly sin. It's been in Denver. In fact, we had about a week a year ago where we had really cold temperatures in the minus teens, and it survived. So we do have some data points that say that besides Provo, that says that yeah, this stuff really can survive cold temperatures. It's not going to survive everywhere. How far north we can go, we don't really know. I planted some up in Grace, Idaho, and it didn't make it the winter. Now we're going to try again maybe and see what happens, but it survived up in Tremonton. We've seen it survive in Logan and Ogden, and I can't make promises. I just warn you, it's a warm season grass. It's possible that it'll not survive the winter, but I'm just presenting you with what I know in terms of cold tolerance. One of its biggest problems, there's always pros and cons, right? And one of the big cons is winter color. It's going to go dormant earlier and it's going to come out of dormancy later. you're going to lose 2 to 3 months of active growth compared to bluegrass or other cool season grasses. And and those cool season grasses, they tend to have pretty nice winter color. They look kind of green even in February. This stuff doesn't. When it goes dormant, it is tan and doesn't look great. So that's one of its biggest problems. It just looks ugly, but I think it's an ugly we need to get used to. Here's a golf course with that's bent grass greens with Bermuda grass fairway, and you can see the Bermuda grass is dormant there. So that's one of the challenges with this is that winter color. This is some of our plots. So we did a BYU Athletics was interested in, well, how long could we stretch it if we cover it? And the answer is we can actually stretch the green out pretty long if we put on a growth tarp. And so that's really good news. So here on the right in most of these pictures, well, it's not always the right, but this went up April 21st. So this is covered on the right. This is Tahoma 31, and this was uncovered on the left. And you can see that, April 21st, that's still pretty dormant. Now, this was a year ago. This year, because of the mild winter, it came screaming out of dormancy much earlier than normal. But this would be more normal, typical of what we see, is that it's still dormant in April unless I cover it. But you can see that by May 1st, it's starting to come out of dormancy. May 5th, it's even more. And then same thing on the other end. I've seen it go dormant as early as Halloween, and then as late as into December. Um, and then in the spring, I usually tell people it's going to come out of dormancy in May. This year it came out in late March. And it differs. I'll show you some pictures of that. It kind of depends on how you treat it. Like, for example, I have a south-facing slope on my front yard. It came out of dormancy way earlier than my backyard. That's more flat and more shaded. This is a management trial that we've done. One of the things you can do to deal with the winter color, if you don't want to do that, very commonly done in the South, including my teams there, the Cardinals and the Raiders, they will overseed with a cool season grass. So that's what we've done in this management trial. We've got 5 different treatments here with Kentucky bluegrass, KBG, by itself. And then the other 4 are hybrid Bermuda grass. One of them was overseeded with perennial rye. Another was overseeded with Kentucky bluegrass. And then another one had a growth cover. So you can see this was this spring. You can see differences in terms of what they look like. This really dark one here is Kentucky bluegrass. The hybrid Bermuda grass is a lighter green than Kentucky bluegrass, by the way. So, but these guys that are right here, they were covered. But this guy right next door has been overseeded with perennial rye, and I can have a nice looking grass. If you look at a football game of the Cardinals in January, and that is overseeded. I mean, it looks green because it's perennial rye, but underneath it is dormant hybrid Bermuda grass. So that's a management option if you don't love the winter color, is overseeding it. You do it typically about the end of August, 1st of September. You need to aggressively dethatch. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, in order to get that overseeding to work. Yeah, sorry, I meant to show. So those are the bluegrasses. That's the hybrid that was without. Uh, anyway, I'm going to buzz through that in the interest of time. Bottom line is we had some really good results with this trial that we did. Uh, Whoops. This is the bluegrass, this top line here, showing the NDVI. It's like, yeah, it loves, fall temperatures. It's doing really well. You can see the Bermuda is kind of dropping off, especially in the second year of our study. This was the Bermuda grass. It really went downhill in the about Halloween. But if I overseed it or I cover it, it's looking greener and doing better. And yeah, similar. And then I'm just going to blow past that and this here too. Just some pictures though. Um, Again, you can kind of see some of the differences from a ground view here. Um, this on the right is at the bottom in this November 26th picture is Kentucky bluegrass. On the left is hybrid Bermuda grass that was covered. And then you can see the overseeded. It doesn't perform quite as well as covering, but still not too bad. And here's an aerial view of it. Now, I wanted to show this because this on the bottom, that's actually Tahoma 31, and it is still dormant. I mean, this is in the first part of April. You can see these things are our covers, but ignore those. But just that's the winter color. Now, the difference between these two sets of plots is that we aggressively dethatched these guys on the top of the picture, and on the bottom, this Tahoma 31, we did not. So we're learning that one of the things that can give me quicker recovery in the spring is by taking that thatch out. If I leave the thatch in, the benefit of it is that it kind of acts like a blanket and it's going to help me be protected from cool temperatures. So it's a little bit of a dangerous game if you dethatch, but but if you plant overseeded, then it's good. But another option, so what we did with this Tahoma here on the bottom is that we just went through this spring and aggressively dethatched. And now it's basically out of dormancy now. So dethatching is one of the tools we can use to manage that. If I'm overseeding, I recommend dethatching. And again, end of August, 1st of September. If I'm not, I just would gently suggest maybe waiting until spring and when we're really past the danger of really hard frost, and then a dethatch. I've got some facts sheets here that you're welcome. I'm going to show these later too, but I've got a hybrid Bermuda grass fact sheet that talks about a lot of this stuff as well as a irrigation one too. So yeah, I'll show these QR codes here in a bit. Let's talk about management though. Mowing, it does well short. It's a prostrate growing grass. It's mowed commonly at a half inch or three-quarters of an inch on sports fields. On golf greens, it can actually be used as a golf green grass mowed at a tenth of an inch. So it will tolerate really short mowing. I don't necessarily recommend that for your yard. Um, you can let it grow longer. In fact, I stretched it out on my backyard. I just said, I'm just going to wait. And I only mowed 6 times last summer. I just kind of waited until it got so frumpy, my wife would say something, and then I'd go out and mow it. But because it doesn't grow tall, it really doesn't look bad if you cut back on the mowing. And that's part of what I'm trying to do is trying to find options for really low maintenance. And I think that this is, one of the things that could reduce the maintenance with this stuff. Now, Kentucky bluegrass, it really doesn't like being mowed less than about an inch and a half. We do. We have sports fields that are mowed at an inch, some at three-quarters of an inch, but they have to be replaced sooner, and they're prone to infestation of weeds, especially annual bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass really wants to be like somewhere between 2 and 3 inches. Again, I mentioned the thatch. The thatch is this buildup of organic material. It's really spongy. Kentucky bluegrass used to be thatchy, but the breeders have done a great job of taking that trait out of the modern varieties and cultivars. And so we really don't get much thatch on most Kentucky bluegrass lawns. But this stuff, if you don't dethatch it, you'll walk across it and it feels like you're walking on a sponge. It'll build up, 2 inches or even more of thatch. And so again, the thatch there's some good things about thatch. Like I said, it's like a blanket, but you get too thick. Water, nutrients, pesticides have a hard time making their way through the thatch. And so we don't really want to make a habit of building that. So if you put in that's one of the things you're going to have to deal with over time is that annual dethatching is going to be part of your maintenance plan. All right, fertilizer. All the nutrients except for nitrogen, sulfur, and iron should be applied based on a soil test. It's one of the biggest mistakes we make. I get calls all the time with folks who are like, "Hey, I don't understand why and not just grass, but everything. It's just like, hey, my tomatoes just don't grow good anymore." And one of my first questions is, have you done a soil test? And the answer for a farmer is almost always yes. For homeowners, it's almost always no. And we really need to change that culture because most of us, we're going out there and we're applying these complete fertilizers. We hire services that come in and they apply one size fits all. And we're just building up nutrients at toxic levels that are not good for the plants or the environment. So we need to base it on soil tests. And when the phosphorus level is sky high, then stop putting on phosphorus. That's really important. There's a lot of grasses. I'd say more than 90% of the yards in around uh, only need nitrogen and maybe sulfur because they've been built up so high in all the other nutrients. Um, so for nitrogen, though, soil testing really doesn't do the trick typically. We usually just need to get on a recipe. I don't won't explain why that's the case because I'm running out of time here, but this is my formula for cool season grasses. Um, for the warm season grasses, a little different. It needs to be kind of spread out more where, we kind of front load the cool season grass, sorry, back load in the fall, most of the nitrogen in the fall with cool season grasses. With warm season grasses, it needs to be more even. I usually say about a half a pound of nitrogen per month of active growth, as long as I'm using that's supposed to say at least, not at least, 50% slow release in my mix. Disease and insects, we just don't have a lot of experience yet. We haven't had any problems so far. In fact, I've planted it in places where I had necrotic ring, which is the bane of my existence. It doesn't seem to be affected by it. Now we know from others that it will be infected, but I think the 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 sessions that we have here just don't seem to be bothering it. Weeds, the typical trimec type mix seems to work. We did have some trouble with one, but we think it was our fault, not its fault. So we're still kind of working that out. One nice thing is that in theory, I can't promise you anything, but when it's dormant and your cool season weeds are growing, you can spray it with glyphosate, and as long as that grass is dormant, it should be okay. I just am cautious because I've seen some disasters where it wasn't 100% dormant. All right, well, that's all I have. Again, I've got all three of these QR codes that I referenced earlier. You're welcome to get these. And if you have any questions, my email is right there. So, questions.
Okay, if you change the type of grass, would you still aerate? If so, should you rake up plugs to maintain level surface?
Well, yeah, that's if you aerate, um, I you don't typically need to remove the plugs. If I'm not sure I totally understood the question, but um, if I am aerating and I'm pulling out plugs, usually they'll just break apart. Like on sports fields, we usually run a drag across them to break them up, and we don't even typically remove them. If it's a golf green, we remove them. So it's certainly an option, but there's really no need to remove plugs when you aerate.
Okay, so the other one, the next one is from David Rice. How are you watering when you have bluegrass and hybrid Bermuda together? Seems if you water for the hybrid, the bluegrass would not do as well and would lose the fight in the summer month. I think it's the similar question, but anything else you want to add?
Well, so in my research plots, we have each plot is individually plumbed, so we can put on whatever water on each plot separately. In my backyard, I can't do that, and so over these last 3 years, I've just been irrigating for the bluegrass needs.
Mhm.
This summer, though, I'm going to see what happens when I just cut the water off. What I think will happen is that my bluegrass is going to die out, and my Bermuda will take over if I stress it with low water.
Mhm. Okay, thanks. The next one is if someone wanted to plant hybrid Bermuda grass, would you have to go to clear out most of the current grass, or you can slice in spring and let it take over?
Well, I think that's part of the answer, and part of the reason I showed that picture of my backyard is I think you got to get rid of the bluegrass. Either that or um, you need to just mow it really short and then keep mowing it short. And so while you're establishing the hybrid Bermuda grass, you don't want to water stress it. Don't go 6 weeks without water. During establishment, it's going to need more water. Um, the problem is if the bluegrass is already established, it's going to have a hard time getting its foot in the door. So I think the best management is to spray it out. to kill your bluegrass or whatever other grass you have, and that's the best answer. Now we've done it all. We've tried it all, and we have been successful at getting it established in existing bluegrass, but we had to abuse the bluegrass again by short mowing and by eventually less water.
Okay. It's from Darren. I understand hybrid Bermuda grass is a great replacement for lawn grass, but I understand it needs frequent mowing to stay healthy. Is that the case? If so, is there a no mow or infrequent mowing drought tolerant grass that you would suggest?
Well, as I said, I only mowed my hybrid Bermuda grass at my house 6 times last summer, and it looked fine. I have a good friend who's a sod grower down in St. George area. I've been down there. They have this area where they just stopped mowing it, and it was amazing to me. It still was growing fine. It was like 4, 5 inches tall after months of no mowing. So it doesn't look great. It doesn't look manicured if you don't mow it, but because it has prostrate growth, it doesn't really look as bad as the cool season grasses that have more vertical growth. So, um, now if you don't mow it very frequently, it's going to get a little thinner. Mowing it short, the shorter you mow it, the thicker it will be, and so that's a trade-off. But yeah, it'll absolutely tolerate infrequent mowing.
Okay. And how does it goes deep, right? So how does it affect tree and what is its growth cover?
That's a question I don't know the answer to. I haven't observed any problems when it's growing next to trees and shrubs. But one of the things that we're still doing research on is actually learning how much water it uses. All evidence would suggest that even though it has deeper roots, it actually uses less water than bluegrass. And so in theory, there would be more water for the trees. Um, now I can't say anything about, nutrients, like if it's competing for other things with deep roots. I don't really know the answer from that side of it.
Is from Katie Collins. One of the concerns we hear about planting hybrid Bermuda grass is the potential for it to spread by the cuttings produced by mowing, similar to how some hybrid Bermuda grasses are planted with springing. The concern is especially high for areas that are adjacent to native natural landscape and other species sensitive area. What is your experience with hybrid Bermuda grass spreading into adjacent area that have more exposed soil area and less canopy? Thanks.
So some of the data we shared with the state when we were able to get them to take this off the noxious weed list was that hybrid Bermuda grass does not do well in native environments. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't, but it kind of wants to be, mowed sometimes. It kind of wants to be managed. I mean, you can't just never mow it, um, because it just tends to die out. So there's actually some data on that. I'm not going to stand here and guarantee that it's never going to spread into other areas. In terms of spreading by mower, um, that could happen. I mean, so it has stolons, and these stolons are above ground stems. They're very prostrate. They tend to stay very close to the surface. And so if you mow it and you take some clippings and you look through the clippings, you're not typically going to find stolons. Now, that's not to say there couldn't be some in there, but again, they tend to just run right on the ground. And so the mower doesn't usually pick them up. They'll root in pretty quickly too. Every time there's a node, which is like about every inch on hybrid Bermuda grass, those will start to root down pretty quickly. And as soon as they root down, then the mower is definitely not going to pick them up. But the potential is there to do that. But again, the fact that it doesn't seed, and I've had my plots, and anybody wants to come down, and we've got an open door, happy to show you our plots, but we just don't have much of a problem with it spreading. Now, have I had it spread? Yes, I have, but it's very minimal. And it doesn't tend to get into our flower beds and those kinds of things. It'll move next door, but it's pretty reluctant to do that unless the whatever's growing next door is weak. If it's fully established, vegetation, it doesn't want to go over there.
Dr. Hopkins, thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation. Maybe next year or so we can bring you again for the updates and newer insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.